What did you learn from this all?
Well, we didn't have sufficient answers. We don't know why it is that Robinhood didn't have proper disclosure. I mean, why couldn't they anticipate that they may have a capital requirement and have gotten loans or guarantees for that, or they should have disclosed to their retail investors. I also thought that they should have asked more questions of the one retail investor there, and there wasn't sufficient attention on the disadvantages to the retail investors.
In terms of the disclosures, what sorts of disclosures are you talking about? Is it just a more advanced notice before that capital call came into Robinhood? Because it seemed like things spiraled out of control so quickly that they disclosed and they did what they did as quickly as they could have. So what sorts of disclosures are you talking about?
Sure. Well, when people sign up on Robinhood, they don't know that Robinhood, if they have liquidity issues, may stop them from trading, especially when they're trying to buy things. And so Robinhood either should disclose saying, if you're a customer of ours, there are circumstances where we're going to halt trading, and here's where we're going to do it. Or what would be better is if they had, like many other financial institutions, the proper arrangement so that they have access to capital to cover a situation like that.
Based on what you learned today, if you did learn, answers to certain questions, is there a pursuit of legislation at this point? I mean, it seemed like there was a lot of grandstanding, and I understand that's what Congress does in terms of wanting to protect your constituents and asking the certain quote unquote right questions. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what's the result of this?
Well, several pieces of legislation. We should have these disclosure requirements that I'm talking about. We should have higher capital requirements for companies like Robinhood. We should make sure that the clearinghouses have clear conflict of interest standards so that they're not having a different set of rules for hedge funds. And we should have conflict of interest laws for companies like Robinhood. As you know, they provide a lot of their data to Citadel. Now, I don't think there's any evidence, and I didn't hear any evidence today that leads me to believe that there was some conspiracy between Citadel and Robinhood, but there are conflicts of interest, and those need to be better addressed. And those are all areas for regulation.
Hi, sir. It's Brian Kelly. So I'm curious, the issue that we're having in big tech, and then since you're from Silicon Valley, is that you all have all these terms of services and everybody just hits click and moves on.
Right.
So how would that be different if Robinhood said, oh, by the way, we might shut down trading? Nobody's going to read them. They're going to hit click and move on. So how does that solve the problem?
Brian, that's a very fair point. These terms of services don't mean much. And that's why I think it has to be informed consent. It has to be in simple language. It has to be in plain language. And it has to be things that users can understand. And it can't be conditional for the entire service. It can't be these 40, 50-page agreements. But I agree with you that the terms of service and the type of consent for data has not worked, and we need to do much better. I take your point.
Congressman, great to get your thoughts. We really appreciate your time. Good to hear from you.
Thank you.
Congressman Khanna of Silicon Valley. Delano, do you think that anything should actually be legislated into law at this point?
Melissa, that's a great question. And I think what we're seeing is there's a lot of people, angry and upset on both sides. I think the conversation needs to be had on how we can have better transparency and better literacy for investors, especially smaller investors. My firm, we serve smaller investors, and a lot of them, have been trading and doing things on loan. A lot of them are newer to this. And I know from my standpoint, I started trading, when I was 20. I'm 31 now. And there's a lot of things I learned along the way that would have probably been better said if they were taught to me or if someone had put this into me. I know that we talked about earlier in the show if there was education in schools. I think there should be some sort of level of education that's put out there for them. As far as legislation, I wouldn't go as far as to say how that's going to be put in place, but I do think we need to have investors better educated so we can understand the plumbing behind this. And now if I talk to friends, they wouldn't really know that, there's 2 days for your stock to settle, or they wouldn't know payment order flow. But if we have literacy more expounded and from a place that's centralized where people can get very good information, I think that would be a really good thing for investors.
Yeah. Anthony, what are your thoughts on sort of legislating this? Because, fact of the matter is as Vlad Tenev pointed out during his testimony, there's plenty of resources on the Robinhood site itself across the internet for how this all works, how the markets work, how trades work, et cetera. And if people choose to read it, great. but for the most part, they don't. That's their choice. That's on them, though.
Yeah, I think, look, we're watching the financialization of everything, right? Really from collectibles to stocks to crypto to a whole bunch of different markets. And so naturally what we're going to see is kind of the retail investor is going to continue to put money into all of these markets. It is an absolute national emergency, the lack of financial education that goes on in our schools. And it's one thing that we should address on a national kind of bipartisan basis. But I also think that what we need to do is when we look at markets right now, we use wealth as a proxy for intelligence. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And so if what we can do is we can switch to an education-based system, right? If you can go in almost like an SAT in a watered-down format and say, listen, you take a test, if you understand markets, knock yourself out, invest in whatever you want, you're educated. If we kind of move toward that education model, I think that not only will we have more efficient and safer markets, but actually people will do better in the market, which is the whole point of what people are trying to accomplish with regulation.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.